Hey everyone, welcome to the Anderson Bros Outdoors. I'm Jake, and today we're going to cover the straight axle stance, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back. As I said, my name is Jake, and today we're going to cover this Vanquish Stance that has a few modifications done to it. It's seen a lot of different variations as I continue to test and tune and tweak it to get it to where I want it. And so I thought I'd share it with all of you to kind of go over the original state to where it is today, everything in between, what I do like, what I don't like, and maybe some tips and tricks for you guys at home. Without further ado, let's dive in. This truck started its life as a ready-to-run Vanquish Stance. It came in the tennis ball green color. It was never ran. I got a really good deal on it. Somebody had purchased it, needed the money, or wanted to get out of crawling, and they sold it. I figured it was a great time to pick up another stance and do a build with it. We do still have the stock stance for future videos and what have you. I let a lot of people drive it, things of that nature. Let's talk about some of the changes. Initially, you can see there are some cosmetic changes, like this Warlord body. Links for all of this stuff is in the description below. I'm not going to say that every time. The Warlord body with the Furitek paint, it is lime green, I think, with sparkles. It's held up really well. I'm very happy with the outcome. Obviously, as I've stated before, the black outline is fantastic to make it look different, but the execution on my part was terrible, so FYI there. Then we have the bed that I designed and printed. It has a couple of scale items in it, a milk crate, a cooler, and a couple of moonshine jugs, milk jugs, moonshine jugs, whatever you want to call them, for the scale points, scale factor. I'm really kind of torn between all-out performance and scale. I want a mixture of both of them for realism. Typically, I prefer performance over looks, but kind of getting, I don't know, it's a weird era for me. We do have a set of AliExpress wheels. These wheels are $18, and then you can buy these $5 beadlock rings on AliExpress as well. I would prefer to run something like Vanquish wheels and their beadlock rings. I just don't have the funds to drop $300+ on those. Unfortunately, at this time, we're rocking the cheap stuff, and it works. The wheels are wrapped in the J Concept tusks. They are 4.75 in size. Inside of the tusks are some inserts that I designed and printed. We have a soft insert in the front and a medium insert in the rear. That way, when you're doing climbs and you're putting pressure on the rear, it still gives, but it doesn't go extremely flat. It's really nice. One of the first phases of this truck was the straight axle conversion. So I had a Pheonix RTR that I swapped the portals over from in the Jeep Comanche trail truck, and I put the straight axles on this truck and I put the portals on that truck. In the stock form, the straight axle is fantastic. Obviously, there is a huge debate, straight axle versus portal, which one's better, blah, blah, blah. I prefer straight axles for realism. They are less performing. You have to be very selective with your lines. You have to be a lot more cognizant of a driver to benefit from straight axles. There are situations where straight axles perform better, and there's also situations where portals perform better. It's really just a give and take in how you drive. So the initial build, I would say, was the stock stance body with the straight axles, and then I converted it to have the bed and the cab, and I drove it like that for a while. Then I added a set of 90mm Desert Lizards in the front and retained the stock suspension in the rear. I drove it like that for a while. One thing I do want to note before I move any further, the stock straight axle front accommodates the servo on axle from the factory. There is actually a hole in the axle, even from this early, whenever the Pheonix, the first RTR came out. The first RTR, Model 1, first batch, supports the servo on axle. So they've been developing this for some time. Obviously, this truck doesn't have the servo on top of the axle, but we'll get into that. I then purchased a stubby conversion kit and the transmission gear set to change it from 6.5% overdrive to 21.5%, and I converted it to behind the axle servo. I drove it like that for a while. I'll tell you that typically I like a lot of overdrive. However, for the straight axle, I think that the 6-ish% to probably 15% was really good. I did not expect that. Definitely an interesting thing there. From there, we converted another truck from two-wheel front wheel steering to four wheel steering. Well, that truck had a aluminum rear axle housing on it. Now we're left with a axle housing that's not being used. Well, that's interesting. What did we do? Well, we converted this truck into a mullet build. Put the aluminum axle housing on the rear, flipped the third member, just like the Vanquish live stream showed a couple of weeks ago. And now we have a mullet, which is a straight axle front and a portal in the rear. You can only do this with the aluminum rear housing. You can't do it with the plastic housing because the third member doesn't fit in there upside down with the plastic housing. So for all of you out there that want to build this, just know that that is the case. Other than that, it's relatively stockish, I would say. We're still using the stock bumpers, the stock frame, the stock transmission-ish with the new gears, the stock skid. We did upgrade the links. These are not any specific branded links. These are the Amazon special links. And then recently I decided that I was tired of the metal sliders bending. I designed and printed some plastic ones. They sit about as the same as the stock metal ones, but we did pull some of the back out. So I think that there's like 12 to 15 millimeter we removed from the rear to keep it from extending past the body. And I raised them up. It's not in the stock location, which required to have the front link hole in the mount. These are pretty thin. They will bend, but they do bend back into place. These are printed out of PLA Plus. I would probably print them out of PETG. The reason that I would do PETG is because it's a lot more malleable, so it will bend and bend back into place and not break. However, I have been running this truck for the last couple of days with these on here, and I've not had any issues, so I'm pleasantly surprised there. Outside of that, we added a Holmes Hobby 1800 kV motor. I'm using a DYS 70 amp ESC, Fly Sky Noble NB4 with the Noble receiver, and we're using an NSDRC 650 servo with Castle 10 amp Beck. We are also running the Incision drive shafts, and that completes the truck. It's actually a pretty simple build in the grand scheme of things. All of these parts are parts that you can buy or print relatively easily with no real issues. You can have a really good truck. Is this the best truck out there? No. I mean, that's going to be depending on your personal preference. It's hard to say what the best truck out there is. But I can tell you this truck is a lot of fun. It's extremely capable, and honestly, it's the one that I've been driving the most recently because I'm tuning it, but also because it's a lot of fun to drive. It will do a lot of lines the portal trucks won't do, specifically because of the front straight axle and the fact that it keeps the front a lot lower to the ground than the rear. It's new, so it's going to be one of my top driving trucks until I get tired of it, potentially, which may or may not happen. So realistically, everything on this truck, with the exception of the printed parts, which you can download most of in the link below, is purchasable. Now, I will say that there are a couple of things that I would recommend personally. Does the stubby kit and the behind the axle kit help? I don't know. Could you live without it? Probably. It's hard to say. However, the drive shafts I would highly recommend. And the reason that I say that, at least in the rear, is because the drive shaft sticks below the links because the third member is turned upside down. So instead of having a high pinion, you have a low pinion, which is problematic for rock climbing. You can see that it has taken a beating. There's a lot of scratches, not only on the pumpkin, but also on the drive shaft itself. So I would highly recommend getting metal drive shafts. If you're going to put one on the back, you just as well put one on the front to even out the weight distribution. Speaking of weight distribution, this truck still sits at a 60% front bias and 40% rear bias. How that is, I have no idea. The other interesting thing is this truck is heavy. This truck weighs just over 6 pounds. I don't know where all of that weight is coming from. One of the things that I am working on is acquiring a carbon chassis to lighten up the top, and I'm hoping that that reduces some of the weight, but I do not know legitimately where all of that weight is coming from. The only brass I have on this truck are rings in the front wheels and some very lightweight knuckle weights in the front. The bed doesn't weigh anything. The printed stuff back here doesn't weigh anything. So yeah, we're rocking the low profile servo, which is another interesting point because I have really beat this servo up. You can see all the scratches on the bottom, And yeah, I was not anticipating that happening. I assumed that the axle would cover at least that part of it, but it's not. The other interesting thing is that this motor plate here is being used a lot. Now, I have thought about removing it to potentially remove this area from being caught all the time, but I don't want to do that because of the fact that it is protecting the motor, and I don't want something to get sucked into the motor or the motor to get caught on something, and it just causes an issue. So I'll take a little bit of a performance hit to run the skid plate for the motor. It's been a fantastic truck. Now, I'm sure that there's a question of what version of this truck do I like the most? And I'll tell you that I like all of them. I like the stock form with portals. I like the stock form with straight axles. I like every version in between. Now, which is the most performer? That's an excellent question. I would say in the current state, it probably performs the best, depending on the driver. This truck requires a lot of driver mod. I mean, it's not just a point and shoot truck like the stock stance. It will climb better lines than the stock stance will, and a lot of other trucks for that matter, but it does require a lot of finesse. It requires a lot of line selection and very methodical driving. If you're not doing that and you're just trying to point the truck and let it do its thing, it's not going to work out for you. As a matter of fact, it'll probably make you mad. There was a video of this truck in a straight axle form and the Wonderbread TRX4 doing some gates, and this truck was in this exact form, but it was still straight axle rear. The score itself was 100 points versus 60. The Wonderbread truck is a bare bones, no sliders, basically a roller with a servo motor and ESC, super lightweight, super capable with megalithics, got 60 points, and this truck got 100. Now, I believe that 20 to 40 of those points could have been avoided if there was a better driver very easily. So we're looking at potentially a 60 to 80 score in a truck that is more scale and probably a pound or more heavier. So it is very impressive. Now, you also have to consider that was with a straight axle rear. With a portal rear, it's doing a lot more of those climbs more effectively because the rear end is lifted probably a half inch more. It allows us to do breakovers a lot better, which is a lot of what that climbing was. I believe this truck is very competitive. I just need to get a lot better at driving, directing, and ensuring that it is doing what I want it to do. At the end of the day, I have a lot of fun, and that's all that should matter. Competition's fantastic. It drives a lot of fun, but there's a fine line between being competitive and people being mean. I don't want to be around that portion of it. I just want to have a good time, talk a little trash, give high fives, and move on, because that's really what it's all about. I came here to have a good time, to get away from work, stress, life, and kind of relax, unwind, and enjoy the hobby. From a cost perspective, is it worth the cost? To me, it is. Again, I'm a little different. I picked up the truck for really cheap. I had some of these parts laying around. I designed and printed some of these parts. It really wasn't a huge cost for myself. However, if I were to do it on a budget, this is what I would do. I would try and find a stance or carbon used for cheaper than I could buy it new. From there, I would buy a front axle kit from Vanquish or A-Main. I think they're $120. And I would run it the straight front, and I would also buy the rear portal. I think this is the form that I like the most. And from there, you don't really need to change out anything else. If you have a 1080 ESC or a Fusion SE or a Fusion Pro, you can throw it in there. I would stick with the stock servo. The stock servo is fantastic. When you increase the voltage from 5.9 volts that the stock ESC resides at to 7.4 or 2S voltage, you get a significant increase in not only power, but also speed. Is it the fastest out there? No. But it works really well for being a stock servo. All you need to do is increase the voltage. Is it an absolute must to do the behind the axle and stubby conversion? No, I would skip that on a budget. I would just run the stock motor. I'd get a 1080 if I had it laying around. Otherwise, I'd go on AliExpress and buy a Fusion SE for 55 bucks. Throw that in there, put the rear axle on, put the front axle on, and send it. I'd run the stock body, and it will perform very, very well. Even the stock wheels and tires will perform very well. The only other thing that I would do is buy the centered clamp rings from Vanquish to add the extra weight on the front wheels, and you have a certified line killer. Granted, you're probably going to look like half the other people out there with a stance or a carbon rocking the stance body. You will have a very good time doing it if you're looking to do some crazy obstacles. The only other thing I want to touch on in this video is the shock configuration. This is a little abnormal. I've got desert lizards on the front and the stock SAD shocks in the rear. I was going to do a video on these to prevent them from leaking, but as you can see, they are leaking still. One of the tricks that you can do is add some green slime from Team Associated to the shock shaft and the seals, and that helps eliminate leakage from the shock shaft itself and the seals. These aren't leaking from the shock shaft. I keep the truck upside down when I'm not using it, and they're actually leaking from the top hat. So from where they screw into the shock body. Typically, you would run Desert Lizards, Deluxe, Prices, pick your shock. You put them on the front and the rear. Now, I'm running Desert Lizards on the front because they have the internal spring in them, and you can see that the shock sucks it to full droop. For the rear, I ran Desert Lizards on there, but I wanted to think from a budget perspective. I don't really want to spend $60 total on some shocks, so I only spent $30 on the front because I need these on the front, and I left the stock SADs on the rear. Maybe they're S8s, not SADs. I think there's a difference between the two. I'm not sure. This configuration just works really well. If I had a set of limiting straps for the front, I could use the all stock shocks. And as a matter of fact, that's what I would recommend. If you buy, I think they're probably $8 to $15, you can save $15 or more on the front shocks and just buy limiting straps and run these stock Vanquish shocks. There is no issues with them. It's a lot easier to run the Desert Lizards because you can do a lot more tuning and adjusting on these. They come with different springs and things of that nature. For the budget-minded people out there, this is the configuration that I would run just like this, or add the front limiting straps to it. The other thing that I've added is I printed a link riser for the rear. Now this is a different design than the one in my last video, or one of my last videos. It's a little bit shorter. This one is going to be added to Cuts 3D along with the longer one. So if you purchase the longer one, you'll also get the shorter one. I believe if you've already purchased it, you can re-download the files and you'll have both. That's where we are. The truck is beautiful. The green and the blue are perfect. It's got some black. I've added the blue accent in the bed. It's got the green cooler logo. I mean, this truck is just so much fun. I think that the mullet builds are going to be the next really popular thing. I think was popular before-ish, but I think it's going to turn into a fad. The next big thing, everybody's going to be running one of these with good reason. There's a lot of benefits here. The real question is Sorca going to make any rules about it? So right now, from my knowledge, there is no rule stating that you can't run a portal rear and a solid front in any class. So it'll be interesting to see if Sorca changes that rules for at least class 1 to eliminate the straight front and portal rear, because that's not really scale. And we're all about scale. What are your thoughts on that? I don't care one way or another. I think that if we're going to stick to a scale standard, then we should probably stick to that. And if that is the case, I think really only class 3, maybe class 2 should be able to run portals, because name a truck that comes out from the factory with portals. I think that there's maybe 5. Maybe. There's the Humvee. I think the G-Wagon has portals. And I don't know of any other ones. Just some random ramblings from somebody that's nobody. Outside of that, this is a great truck. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for making it this far. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, feel free to give us a like. Otherwise, we hope you have a great day.